Good evening, everybody. I first have to correct Greg. The idea that any one person could have moved this or kept it moving is really something I want to just address. This project has required the partnership of so many, both my UCI colleagues on the line, but I also see a few others that have been involved for such a long time. Angie from the Western Reserve Historical Society, who's been just our lead interpretive partner on this. Ren Feibig from Restore Cleveland Hope, who's been engaged with this project really since its saving and since UCI before UCI owned the house. And also Lauren Pacini, who's been in taking photos of the house and that we've been able to utilize to help tell the story through images. So I want to acknowledge that we have so many on the phone, even right now, that have been involved in this project, and I'll call out some more as we go through this presentation. I just like to start any presentation just with an overview of University Circle and University Circle Incorporated. I feel very fortunate that our work is to be working in University Circle, really the hub of education, healthcare, and culture in Northeast Ohio. And our 1 square mile district is home to over 40 nonprofit institutions, all just doing amazing and incredible work. You have the big players that almost everyone knows, the Case Western Reserve universities, university hospitals, Severance Hall. And then you have smaller, lesser known institutions that really round out that 40 that are still doing like just as incredible work, like the Cleveland Hearing and Speech Center and, growingly and hopefully the Cozad-Bates House, which we'll share today. In terms of the work that UCI does, I serve as the planning director and am in our development team. And we like to talk about the work of UCI in 3 buckets commonly. So on the development side, we are moving forward projects like the Cozad-Bates House. We are also doing large scale mixed use developments on a lot of times surface parking lots in University Circle. We're doing improvements to public spaces, public art. In conjunction with our service department, doing transportation improvements that make University Circle a better district for all modes of transportation. In our services bucket, we have our University Circle Police Department, our ambassador services, and transportation services like our Circle Link free shuttle that has 2 routes that we've been able to maintain even throughout the pandemic to better connect University Circle. And then in our advocacy bucket, we like to highlight our events connecting the community to University Circle, as well as our community education department connecting lifelong learners across Northeast Ohio and increasingly targeting neighborhoods surrounding us with amazing resources of University Circle. So apologies if some of you might have heard that pitch and overview dozens of times, but I always like to at least start with that context in talking and also how it fits within the mission of University Circle Incorporated, which is that we are building a community experience that connects all people with Cleveland Center of Culture, Healing, and Learning. And certainly this project is really evidence of that. And connected to a prior project that we did that really helped to start to connect people with the stories of University Circle, and that Circle Walk. It's our district-wide interpretive signage program. There are 40 of these, what we like to call story poles that you can discover and learn about throughout University Circle, throughout that 1 square mile. If you are so inclined, you could visit all 40 on a 5-mile walk. I think maybe Greg and I, and maybe some others on the call would be the ones that would do that 5-mile journey. The poles themselves have images, narrative, fun facts about people and places that built up University Circle. We also have an app, a web-based app component to it, circlewalk.org, that breaks down those 40 points into topic areas, early history, innovation, architecture and parks, or geographies like around Wade Oval, around town. And just again, connecting people with the stories and histories of University Circle and helping to share that more broadly. In that project, we also had a curriculum component similar to Cozad. So we had an early learners component, Circle Walk Adventures books that is still widely distributed and popular. And also working with Teaching Cleveland, units on progressivism, industrialism, and the rise of urban Cleveland, helping educators connect to Circle Walk as a resource for them in their work. So this was really my a project I was working on in the early stages of Cozad, and I see it as so connected to the Cozad-Bates House project, partially because the final stop on Circle Walk is the Cozad-Bates House. So it was one of the early installations of some education and interpretation at the house itself. So you can see there the image from there. In terms of a timeline, and I will, especially with Ren on the phone, I will acknowledge that this is an abbreviated timeline of the Cozad-Bates House and history. And certainly there could be a broader one of the Cozad family and University Circle more generally. But in thinking about the house itself, the first portions were built in 1853 by Andrew Cozad, one of the first settlers of University Circle, for his son Justice, who actually didn't live in the house immediately. He worked on the railroad and so went out west. There were additions made to the house in the 1860s. That's intentionally general. We don't have really great records of exactly what was done when, but we know in general that there was an addition made to that initial farmhouse at the timeline of the 1860s. And then when Justice Cozad returned permanently from working on the railroads out west, he came and designed and helped to construct the Italianate addition that many people, if they are aware of the Cozad-Bates House, think about that grand Italianate addition that you can see from Mayfield Road. It remained a grand family house for decades. Then, approaching the 1900s, the residence was converted into a boarding house, renting to the growing population and meeting the demand of housing for the University Circle District. It ultimately, later in the decade, went into institutional control. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. In 2006, it was listed as a City of Cleveland landmark. And within that gap period, it unfortunately became vacant for decades, was threatened with demolition. And Restore Cleveland Hope was an integral part of having the house saved. Their founder, Joan Southgate, walked 500 miles of the Underground Railroad across 2 summers, drawing attention and raising importance to stories of anti-slavery activism in Cleveland, but she also called attention to this house itself and the importance of saving it. At that time, the Cleveland Restoration Society, the councilman for the area, Kevin Conwell, were all involved in this fight to save the house and to have it landmarked, which it was ultimately done. Something that's maybe not intuitive is that actually having a house designated as a local landmark offers more protection than having it as a national register, at least in terms of the development process here. So at that time in 2006, the house was then donated to University Circle, and we had to figure out what was next. We had a house that had been vacant for decades that needed a lot of work. We were able to fundraise in the first couple of years to do a roof replacement, porch repairs, and some foundational work and interior prep. And then we explored different uses. We envisioned splitting up the entire house as office space, talked to a number of nonprofits, and we could just never make the numbers work. In 2014, we had a game changer of a significant gift from the state capital budget to do a first phase of an interpretive center on the site. We had to figure out what that meant and where that might go, but we had a significant gift of over $300,000 that we could get something moving with. So we did an adaptive reuse master plan in 2015 that really started to outline this phased approach, where we would open up a portion of the house as an interpretive center or interior exhibit space, small museum. We've never quite hit on that sweet spot of the exact best word, while we plan for what happens with the rest of the site. We also, in conjunction, did a mothballing effort to try to stabilize as we were fundraising. We were able to raise $1.3 million and kick off interior construction in 2019. That was followed the next year with exhibit installation and site construction. Of course, the coronavirus has significantly impacted both our construction timeline and our ability to open it up to the public, which is why I'm so happy to be sharing this story with all of you and help give a preview to what's coming. But we do hope, as you'll see in the following slides, to open out the outdoor portions of the space this spring and take down that construction fence. And then as health and safety protocols allow, having people inside. Now in the interim, we have some 3D virtual tour imagery that I'll share at the end. And so I'll just start to walk through all of that. So here's our beautiful Cozad-Bates house. And when looking at the master plan, we really started to, again, identify that a portion of the house could move forward first, that we could open the house, provide public access. And the pre-Civil War, or roughly pre-Civil War, again, getting back to that question about the 1860s additions, the ground floor of that was really identified as that space where we could tell that story. Now, University Circle Incorporated is not in the museum business or exhibit fabrication business, so we immediately turned to finding a partner, the Western Reserve Historical Society, to help us through that, to help us through research, development, operations, and planning and creating this. So we could not have done this without our partners at Western Reserve Historical Society. And again, thank you, Angie, on the line. We also could not have done it without Restore Cleveland Hope, with that long history of the house and their programming that they did at the house. So they were really, the first partners around the table with UCI to figure out, what is this space? What can it be? And again, initially focused because of funding on just a portion of the inside of the building. The site really came later. I know some of you might be asking, well, what happens to the rest of the house? And in the master plan, it had identified, and just to go back to that first slide, that a neighboring nonprofit, the Transplant House of Cleveland, who exists in buildings surrounding the Cozad-Bates House and provides low-cost housing and supportive services to transplant patients and their families as they seek services in Cleveland. They were identified as a second use, where the remainder of that first floor could be community space, community dining, community living for transplant patients and their families. And then the second floor could be 7 bedrooms and restrooms, more of a suite style living, whereas right now they have really apartments. And it was an interesting process to go through because, you're looking for, is there any commonality between those two uses? And this really beautiful connection we found is that, of course, in any story of the Underground Railroad, which is what is ultimately one of the things interpreted in the house, you talk about a journey of a freedom seeker towards freedom. And transplant patients also similarly talk about a journey, their transplant journey, and Transplant House is there to provide them support on that journey. And within the interpretation that we were hoping to share, we were sharing, the support that Black and white activists in Cleveland provided freedom seekers in that journey. So there's this really unique connection there between the planned uses. Going back specifically to the Interpretive Center, in working with our partners at Western Reserve Historical Society and Restore Cleveland Hope, what was the story we were hoping to tell here? There is a community story and legacy that you might have heard or heard before, that the Cozad-Bates House was a stop on the Underground Railroad. There is no evidence to support that. We don't know that the house itself was a stop, or don't have any, at least, evidence to document that. What we do know, though, is that this house is the only remaining pre-Civil War fabric in University Circle, and that University Circle itself, which was leading up to the Civil War, known as East Cleveland Township, had a number of residents that were active in the Underground Railroad, both family members of the Cozads, but also the neighboring Ford family and others. And so this felt like an appropriate place to share that story. And more than just share history, which is important, it was also essential that we connect it to modern day, that this history is so relevant to our time today. So, our guiding phrase became covering the past, engaging with the present, and looking toward the future. And that helped to guide the development. What also helped to guide the development of the content was that, in addition to, again, our members of Restore Cleveland Hope, we created a community advisory committee of educators, activists, and historians to help guide us in what the focus was. Because, as you might have noted on the floor plan there, it's about a 1,000 square foot space. So there were limits to how much we could share. It's a very important story, and we were trying to connect both past to present. So it became, a really interesting development process of how do we narrow this down in some ways, but also make it expansive enough that it's relevant. And our community advisory committee was just critical to helping us helping us do that. One specific, story just in terms of the development of it is we knew we always wanted to do this connect past to present. Initially, we were talking about doing that through talking about human trafficking. So the ways that slavery was still with our society today, literally. But in working with our community advisory committee, that felt, disconnected from the history of slavery and white supremacy and racism in America, that if we were connecting it to modern day, we needed to connect it to that story. And so it was at one of the meetings with the community advisory committee that ultimately the way that we connected, that it was, determined and discussed that we would talk about the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments as the way that we attempted to, abolish slavery and bring Black Americans into society, but then all of the ways that we're still challenged with what those amendments mean, both through history, but also today. So I'll talk a little bit about that and how we do that in the exhibit. This just starts to lay out the stories at the Cozad-Bates House that we're telling. So in the West Wing there in the orange, that's really the first space of the exhibit where we set context. Who were the Cozads? What was Cleveland like before the Civil War? What was slavery? What were people running from and fighting against? In the East Wing is where we start to tell stories of activism in Cleveland, but we're careful to balance that with acknowledgement of racism in the North. So we talk about things like Ohio's Black laws, where free Black settlement was limited here because of things like surety bonds, where a Black person looking to settle in Ohio would have to find two people willing to post a surety bond that they wouldn't become dependent on the state. But we talk about active local activities. We talk about the Oberlin Wellington rescue trial held in federal court in Cleveland, the Sarah Lucy Bagby Johnson case, what we think is the last case of a freedom seeker being returned to slavery prior to the Civil War. And then not only that story, but also highlighting the media's reactions to it. What were newspapers saying at the time? And, then as in now, they had different perspectives. You had the plain dealer celebrating that she was returned and hoping that that might still save the Union, that we were following the law. And then you had, places like the Leader and Herald bemoaning that we had to follow this infamous law, and also calling out that protesters at the time weren't being treated well. Who's heard that before? So we really make those connections, hoping that people see the connection to today. And then in the small room, which we actually don't label, it's kind of a connecting room between the East and West Wings and community room, we close out that history with stories of Lincoln and Cleveland. He came actually right after the Sarah Lucy Bagby Johnson case. And again, kind of was saying preserve the Union, which was not a message that abolitionists or anti-slavery activists wanted to hear. And then his death and ultimately the end of the Civil War and an introduction to those 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which can get further discussed in the community room. Our designers were a really interesting and wonderful part of this process. They really tried to reflect, one, they had a lot of meetings with our community advisory committee, and we really appreciated that they took the care and listened to do that. Within the house, they really tried to create that balance of past and present. So everything from being inspired by historical and modern typefaces and mixing them together, to the lighting fixtures inside, to the color palette. Also, given the time period that we were interpreting, we have limited images. So they really tried to make the most of them by incorporating them into wall coverings and window coverings, and while not making it completely overwhelming. So it was a really interesting design process as well. So here you can start to see actual photos of the exhibit itself, which again, we'll go through with a virtual tour. This is that first exhibit space, that West Wing where we're setting context. And ultimately, the exhibit is called Finding Hope, Cleveland and the Underground Railroad at the Cozad-Bates House. So I'll just share a couple of images. Again, we'll go on the virtual tour. This is the next room, the East Wing, where we talk about the Underground Railroad network in Northeast Ohio, and also more broadly in Ohio, that there was this dense network of activity here, given that Ohio bordered on 2 slave states and was between those states and ultimate freedom in Canada. pulling newspaper clippings, again, from that time. So covering the Sarah Lucy Bagby case with the human sacrifice, which is the 4-panel document you can see there, really calling out that Lucy was a human sacrifice to the Union. There's a wonderful poem that we've been able to find and highlight through that piece by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, one of the first published Black women in the country, and she wrote a poem to the Cleveland Union Saver. So that's one of the pieces that we have there in the exhibit. And then this is a photo of the community room. So the exhibits in this room are intentionally digital. We're interpreting and approaching present day. So we know that we'll need to update that more regularly. But in developing this, we reached out again to our neighboring partners, to the Case Western Reserve University Social Justice Institute and their professors to help talk about, so each of those screens covers one of the 3 amendments, and they include the text of the amendment, the history of ratification, early history of it being passed, and then current issues of today. So addressing them all, the 13th Amendment talks about mass incarceration, the 14th Amendment talks about immigration, and the 15th Amendment talks about voting rights. We could completely redo the 15th Amendment one, and probably will soon, given everything that's happened. And thankfully, the digital format allows us to do that. The other thing to highlight in this space that you can really see in this image is that we have a large table in this space, hoping that, the exhibits facilitate discussion. The patterning on that table is Cleveland's quilt pattern in the Underground Railroad quilting tradition. We're the only city to have its own pattern, the Crossroads pattern. So we incorporated that imagery into the table itself. Also, one of the design elements I like to call out inside of this space, again, all of the people that worked on this took such care and to learn the story, to reflect the story in design, but even the lighting fixtures. So you can notice that inside of the lighting fixtures, they're candle figures, historic, and then the outside has a more modern geometric box. One of our early visitors from Restore Cleveland Hope, who we were able to take through this space, said that it also reminded them of light shining through a cage, which is just such a beautiful metaphor and imagery. So I like to highlight that as well. Because we were able to fundraise and find additional partners like the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, we were able to, in this first phase, not only create an interpretive space inside of the space, but also look outside. So I want to talk about that as well. Look at my time check here. So luckily, we've been able to not only preserve the house, but also the front lawn, which we wanted to reimagine as a new green space for University Circle. In addition to the lawn space, which has long been a space that Restore Cleveland Hope has done their Freedom Festival annually, we wanted to create some educational signage. We did some bioretention for the site in partnership with the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. And our designers here really wanted to create some breathing room because the inside of the space is very dense. We've really made every wall of that environment work. And the kind of inspiration for this was to really connect emotionally with people, to get them to care about the story, to then want to go in the house and learn more. So in terms of the concepts, there was an idea of risk, of secrets, of trust, and of hope, all connected to the stories of freedom seekers and activists that would have helped them on their journey. So incorporating the idea of risk, there are hiding spaces. We can't do hiding spaces in a public space, but there are more secluded spaces of the lawn. In terms of secrets, the idea that nothing could be written down, that the stars were your guide. So there's some installations of the North Star and Big and Little Dippers on the site. Trust, that freedom seekers had to trust strangers, that they would not turn them in and be rewarded in doing so, that they would offer them food and shelter and guidance on their brave journeys. And that is shown on site through the establishment of an equity table. So there's a wooden picnic table that connects to a quote as well, a place where people join and trust each other to have conversations and sit together. And then this idea of hope, that a freedom seeker would need hope to continue. And part of that might be foraging, finding an edible fruit or berry that could keep you going. And so there are both edible and medicinal plants within the plantscape as well. So this just starts to call out the site, and we have some photos, but the site plan is still probably the best way to give an overview of everything out here. Can everybody see my cursor? Yeah. So here you can see the North Star installation, the Little Dipper, the Big Dipper. We have here pavers that are intentionally pointing north, herringbone, so that when you're on site, you know where north is, which felt really important to us in terms of an interpretive story. This bioretention area, again, is planted with both edible and medicinal plant life, which we have signage interpreting. This is our resting place, so not hidden, but a little secluded here, using existing sandstone from the site. The paver pattern here, all of this is permeable, tying into that stormwater. And then there are quotes all throughout the site, both local and national quotes tying to this story. This is just a rendering of that space, that freedom seekers resting place that you can see here. The permeable pavers, there's a different patterning in the ladle of the Big Dipper, just calling further attention to it. And this is actually where we have, we've acknowledged and recognized Joan Southgate walk here, again, a leader of Restore Cleveland Hope. This starts to show where those quotes are. These are interpretive panels that are there. So going through what a person might be thinking when they're deciding to run, what they're risking when they do that, what someone might be thinking about when they decide to stand up and take action by helping a freedom seeker, which was against the law, standing up against law and following a higher law. So I realize on the screen it looks like a lot of text, but comparative to the inside, less text, really getting to more of an emotional story of this space. These are the quotes that we have. So the first one is actually a local quote from Justice Cozad himself and his journal, where he said that I myself have worked many a day in the field with runaway slaves and always sat at the table to eat with them. So this is at the equity table inscribed in the ground on site. Frederick Douglass, freedom is a road seldom traveled by the multitude. That's at the entrance. A quote from Langston Hughes from Let America Be America Again. And then a quote from Harriet Tubman, which is actually in the bioswale, which is an area that is meant to take on water. And the full quote is, there was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other. And actually installed at level so that if at any time there is water, it might be that the only part of the text you could see is liberty or death. And then depending on the water level, you would see different parts of it. Now it's not meant to retain water for a long time, so that particular element would be, you'd see that a smaller amount of time, but still a very intentional and interesting design element. This just starts to show the plant life again, so it gives a suggestion of what that educational signage looks like. For example, we have Magnus coneflower, echinacea plants calling out that they can be used as tea and boost immunity. Yarrow, which is again an antimicrobial that could be used to heal a wound. But in addition to this idea of edible and medicinal, landscape architects also intentionally picked gnarled or spiky plants, getting to the idea that this is a hard history. So the plant you see all the way on the right is a sea holly. So a very spiky plant that's used throughout. This is what the site looked like this fall. We're very excited for the grass to come in, for the plant life to really get established, but we're really looking forward to being able to take down the fence and welcome people into this site. It's been such a long journey coming, we still have the rest of the house, so not over yet, but it feels like a really great moment and time to celebrate. I certainly want to thank, we could never have done this without both our funders in raising $1.5 million towards this first phase, but also our project partners, not just our architects, designers, contractors, and artisans, but also our interpretive partners, which I mentioned throughout the presentation. So I am such a fast talker. I apologize. Maybe, I don't know, Greg, what do you think makes sense? Do you want to talk quickly about the curriculum that was developed and then do the virtual tour? Do you want me to do the virtual tour quickly now and then talk about curriculum?
Yeah, let's have you do the virtual tour and then I'll talk a little bit about the curriculum.
Okay, so I am going to switch. Oh no. Well, okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully this works as well as it did in practice. Okay. So I will put this in the chat box. I know a part of today's agenda is for all of you to give us some feedback on how we might best connect this space with you and you with this space. But this is, this just allows for a visit before an in-person visit, given the pandemic. There's 3D imagery here that you can look throughout the space. Zoom into some of the exhibits and imagery here, and also a series of 20 stops that allow you to zoom into a picture in the exhibit and learn a bit about it. So really envisioned to be not an exhaustive ability to read and visit the entire exhibit, but really a kind of a highlights tour of some of the content that's in the space. So this, for example, is an 1845 view of East Cleveland Township, getting to this idea that it was very rural, it was very pastoral, it's very different from what the area looks like today. And it was a place where you could have a secret. And many people did have a secret here in their help of freedom seekers. So I'll just quickly, without making everyone motion sick, take a walk through the space. Another piece I always like to highlight is this wall engraving. Throughout the exhibit, we use these beautiful engravings by William Still, who was based in Philadelphia and wrote a book called The Underground Railroad as he interviewed freedom seekers traveling north. And he did these illustrations of those freedom seekers on their journeys. And so we feature a few of them here in the exhibit, both as wall coverings, but then also here in the panel as well. This, for example, is, it's a little bit of a misnomer to say an Underground Railroad trail. It's not like it was a marked trail someone was following, but certainly this loose network of activists and just the number of places that are known to have helped freedom seekers on their journeys north. And this image just helps to convey that. Take a spin around here. This is our wall of activism in Cleveland. So at that time period of 1860, where were people living and working and being active in the fight against slavery, whether that was directly through the Underground Railroad or perhaps as an editor of a newspaper that was sympathetic to freedom seekers, to abolitionists. And again, we'll share this link so that you can take a look at this, but just wanted to highlight this. This is Lincoln and Cleveland at the Weddell House Hotel, again, shortly after the Sarah Lucy Bagby trial. And then here is the community room with the exhibits developed in partnership with the Social Justice Institute. The 13th Amendment, again, talking about mass incarceration. And that's what I have. So again, I'm really thrilled to be able to share the story with you and give you a preview of what we hope to make more widely available later this year. A critical part of this was also developing a curriculum, which of course with school visits being non-existent right now, we've been able to pilot but not offer widely. And Greg, I know that you were gonna just talk about that a bit.
Before I do that, I just wanted to see if, because I know Elise has to jump here in just a bit, if anybody had any specific questions for Elise based on her comments that she just made before we say goodbye. And by the way, a big thank you for joining us. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Mark.
absolutely. And I can stick around. I don't have to leave right away. I can stick around till 6, but thanks, Greg. Mike?
Hi, I was just wondering if since this is an interpretive center, if you've given any thought to, once it finally opens to the public, of possibly having interpretive actors who will take people that are on the journey of the stories as part of the house, as part of something for the future.
So I'm curious if you know Ren and if you're a plant, but we have a few actors that we actually do have some actors that have done interpretations at the Cozad-Bates House, both regularly through the Freedom Festival. So Ren is Tenny Cozad, Justice Cozad's wife, and shares that history. Also, this is one of the spaces highlighted on the Take a Hike tour of University Circle, and they have not connected to the house as much to the narrative, but Elizabeth Stanton Day is an actress that they represent on the tour. And then Ren, I don't know if you can chime in, and I'm blanking on who the other actor that portrays someone from the narrative. I think one of the Fords. So we do
Kevin Cronin does Cyrus Ford.
Cyrus Ford, thank you. Yeah, so we have a few that have done that, more through events. So a great idea, though. Definitely, that's something that really enhances, the Freedom Festival, the Take a Hike tours. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Elise about the house? And like I said, I'll get to the curriculum, but anything that she had talked about?
Actually, I do have another question that just came to mind. When you were going through all the renovations, because I know you were talking about trying to connect the house to the Underground Railroad, did they do any archaeological dig, or did they do any imaging to see if there was a basement or anything?
We did. We did both, actually. Working with Elizabeth Hogue, who formerly of Tracy, now with Cleveland Institute of Art. They did a dig in the basement when early on, this is before my time with UCI, they had thought that they might have seen a spirit marker in the basement. So they did some excavation under where they thought the dwelling would have been. And they found a lot of remnants showing kitchen uses, but nothing that would have tied it to the Underground Railroad. And then she also did some, I don't remember what it's called, but where she's pinging the ground essentially to see what might be underneath, if something might be found. And nothing was found that could support that narrative.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I'd share a little bit about the curriculum. This is obviously very specific to the educators here, but we want to engage all those who are not educators as well in a conversation about getting connected to both the subject matter and the house specifically, of course, when we can open it. But big thanks to Restore Cleveland Hope, for instance, who provided incredible background on so many Cleveland activists who really, for all intents and purposes, by most people have been sort of lost to history. So Restore Cleveland Hope did incredible background research on so many activists in the Underground Railroad. And then the Cleveland History Center also did the bulk of the curriculum development, and they tested out on a few classrooms as well, some of the curriculum, which I'll describe here in just a moment. But the Cleveland History Center was fantastic to work with, and they provided most of the images that you see and digitized and all of that. So they were a great partner. I should say for the curriculum, the development of it is, for those of you who may be familiar with Facing History and ourselves, I taught Facing History for many, many years. It is very much informed by Facing History and ourselves. And by that, we mean it was of each module, there are 2 modules, and it's currently for middle school and high school students, is designed to focus on choices that individuals made to either support the law as it existed, or to do things to go against the law. So that was really important. And Pam Donaldson, as you probably saw, was an integral part of the Community Advisory Committee. So just wanted to highlight that it's a small space, as Elise, as she mentioned. And so we know that any class that comes in is likely going to have to be split up. And so the Cleveland History Center did a great job of developing 2 modules for the middle and high school curriculum. One group of students will be doing something at the Cleveland History Center. The other group will be doing something at the Cozad-Bates, and then they'll switch. So at the Cleveland History Center, kids will explore issues of just laws and discuss sort of the embedding of slavery into the US Constitution. And then they will actually do a reenactment of the trial of Sarah Lucy Bagby. As Elise said, what we think is the last person to be returned to the South under the Fugitive Slave Act before the start of the Civil War. So a lot of the questions revolve around the different bias in the media, about whether or not individuals who would have supported turning her in or who fought against it, what they might have been thinking. So there's quite a bit of thinking through and talking through individual actors. So the other piece is that they get to know actual names of individuals who were involved in the Sarah Lucy Bagby case. At the Cozad-Bates House, the students will be actually exploring the context of Cleveland, more specifically, and what the city of Cleveland was like as it related to not only slavery, but even just settlement patterns for African Americans and whites throughout the city pre-Civil War. But the bulk of it is encouraging kids to learn more about each of the activists and have conversations and share what they learn about the activists and what might have motivated them. So as Elise has highlighted, the 2 main cases that we focus on in the exhibit are both the Sarah Lucy Bagby case, but also the Oberlin Wellington rescue, which is a fascinating case of a rescue that, well, as slave catchers came to take an individual, John Price, back into slavery, dozens and dozens of Oberlin residents broke him out of the hotel that they were staying at and were tried in federal court on Public Square. And as they started to try all the individuals who were involved, the first 2 individuals were found guilty of breaking the federal law, but there were so many protests in downtown Cleveland that the federal judge actually vacated those sentences and allowed the other activists to go without a penalty. So all the debates and conflicts around that. Anyway, so in the Cozad-Bates House, the focus is much more on Cleveland and its activists. And then the final piece is actually in the community room. And as Elise said, you know, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were originally drafted as a way to address all these inequalities that existed, especially around race. And yet in many ways, as we exist today in 2020, 2021, in many ways, those amendments have produced even more difficult issues. So in the 13th Amendment, the rise of mass incarceration, for those of you who don't know, I'm assuming many educators here know, the 13th Amendment language actually says that slavery is abolished, but for being charged and found guilty of a federal crime. And so a felony. So the idea of mass incarceration and control of African-American men in particular, and how much it dominated the late 19th and 20th century. So there's a 13th Amendment where kids have an opportunity to read both the pro and con of mass incarceration and to debate that, because we want them to sort of place themselves in the midst of these debates. As Elise said, the 14th Amendment examines citizenship, blood citizenship. And then the 15th Amendment takes a look at voting rights acts because of course it was supposed to be different, and there are many conflicts around each of those amendments. So that's what the curriculum does, is designed to get kids to understand individual actors, try to get kids to think about what they might have done or even to empathize with what individuals did, and then to put themselves today in the context of the conflicts that the 13th through 15th Amendment have produced. So that is the curriculum that is, like I said, largely developed by the CHC, but in partnership with the Restore Cleveland Hope and UCI. So a big thanks to the Cleveland History Center, the Western Reserve Historical Society, and Restore Cleveland Hope. So do you have any questions before we take this last piece about the curriculum as I described it? Brooke.
So I have not heard of the story of Sarah Lucy Bagby. So I am just curious as what happened to her when she was returned, and especially so close to the Civil War.
So it's actually really fascinating. I wish we knew more about her, I will say that. But Sarah Lucy lived in the part of Virginia that became West Virginia. So ultimately, when it seceded, she returned to Cleveland and is buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. We don't know, and this is something that is another kind of, there's so many lenses through which you can look at the Cozad-Bates House itself, its story. Unfortunately, we know far more about white activists than we do about Black. We have way more images of white activists than we do of Black, and that it was a constant frustration as we were trying to develop this exhibit on balance, and really wanting to highlight the diversity of activism here. So in the exhibit, for example, there's only one known photo of Sarah Lucy, which we have in the exhibit. There was a rendering, a modern day drawing of her, kind of done as a composite from descriptions of her. But what we do know of her is that, you know, she was returned to slavery. She was ultimately returned to Cleveland and lived and worked here, and is buried at Woodlawn. So Ren, I'll throw it over to you, or and I don't know, Fran, if you might know any more than that, but that's what we know.
Thank you.
I typed a quick response in the chat, but I goofed and sent it to Greg directly, so I just redirected it. She's buried in Woodland Cemetery, and she wasn't a slave much longer because the Union troops got to West Virginia, which was Virginia at the time, very shortly after she got there. So she was back and forth, but she was more of a statement than an actual back in the fields or anything for any length of time. And she ended up in Cleveland. They had a big celebration at one time honoring her upon her return. And Dorothy Salem in the Woodland Cemetery organization, they'll have festivals that you can find online, and they'll have they have actors down there, and they almost always have someone portraying Sarah standing by the grave and telling her story.
Yeah, Robin Peace is a local actress that often portrays Sarah. To mark your earlier question, so another actress connected to this story. And thank you, Ren, for mentioning Dorothy and Woodlawn Cemetery Foundation. She was another critical partner of our advisory committee.
I wonder if there are other questions that you might have. Okay. Yes.
Just real quick, Elise, has there been, how much research have you done, like with the National Center down in Cincinnati, to try to connect the Cozad-Bates House as part of the Underground Railway?
So in terms of what I'll acknowledge is the story inside of the house really told the histories we knew. There wasn't, we benefited from active research previously done by Dorothy Salem and Woodlawn Cemetery, Restore Cleveland Hope. it was really a synopsis of what we kind of know at this time. We did actually go down as we were working through what this space would be and who it might connect with. We went down to Cincinnati just to talk to them about whether, you know, they have such a vast collection there, whether we might be able to kind of partner with them and be a satellite office. That wasn't anything that they were interested in at that time. But we did reach out to them kind of just in the early development to let them know who we were, that we were interested in making connections with them. You know, I think that there is active research that can be done, and you know, Ren has worked with students in the past to go to Western Reserve Historical Society, look through some of the primary source documents, find out more about these families and about the work that happened here. So it's a story that's not done being told, and it's a story that really highlights the importance of whose stories you tell and how they get recorded, and how that influences what we know and what we have to infer or guess.
The Cozads are identified by several historians as several of the other Cozads families around in an area as helping Samuel Cozad Jr., Samuel III, Justice Cozad, for whom the house was built. He talks in his memoirs about when he was a young man and working in the fields with his father, Andrew Cozad, that's where he worked shoulder to shoulder with slaves and with runaways, he called them. And his father always insisted, and his father boarded them, and his father always insisted that they get their dignity by eating with they all ate together. And that's why that community table is, the picnic table is outside the house now. And we also have the Fords in some of their journals and things. They talk about Cyrus Ford and his very active Horace and Horatio and Frank, and they just took turns taking wagon loads of people down to the docks in Cleveland or down to John Brown. And in one of the Fords writes in his journal, I can't remember if it's Horatio or Horace, about having a conversation with a couple of runaways as they worked together chopping wood on the hillside up there, and that they were, you know, really interesting people and blah, blah, blah. So most of the information that we have that I've found in documents, it just talks about interaction as an offhanded way, rather than saying, yeah, we hit them. It's more like we interacted with them. And but you have to really read personal letters and personal documents, and there's got to be, I'm sure there's more, but I'm guessing that when they were housed, the McElrath Tavern, which is out by Windermere Rapids Station, was a huge Underground Railroad safe house. And there were lots of places out there that the McElrath family was helpful. And, but you have to, my guess is, for example, the Cozads, I would think they probably had them in their barns or in their, you know, the housing they had for the hired hands, and not necessarily in the residence. That's a guess, because I mean, that Cozad-Bates house is pretty small, for example. And during the Civil War, the Duty family was living there, and there were quite a few people in that family. So it's more, in my opinion, and this is simply a guess, they were more likely living with the hired hands in whatever accommodations they had, whether it was in the barns or in a tenant house nearby or something like that.
Mark, just in terms of your question about like network connections, we know from those accounts that the Fords had connections with Quakers in Massillon. There's references to the connection that Ren referenced, where, you know, people being active in East Cleveland Township had connections to Cleveland and John Brown's barbershop and making those transfers. So we have some knowledge of those networks, just again from those primary source documents.
So thank you for your questions. We appreciate it. And again, thank you, Elise and Ren, for giving us insights and background. I really appreciate it. For the last part of this program, we really just wanted to engage you with a couple questions. And we realize that there are some educators here, there are some non-educators here. For the educators, this question is for you. what would you like to see in terms of virtual offerings that could get you connected so that you would be more likely to have your kids connected to this material when you cover this material? So that's first thing to think about. What sort of virtual offerings would be really useful for you as you connect your students? And then for the non-educators, what do you think virtually would also be something that could also draw you, more likely to draw you to the website where there is the virtual tour, so that we have an idea of how we can be responsive to the basic overall community? So anyone, questions open. Educators, what would you like to see virtually to sort of connect your kids better? And non-educators, what do you think would draw you or friends and families to this exhibit? And we'll take notes.
Hi, everyone. I teach in Cleveland at New Tech West High School, and hope everyone's doing well. This is be awesome for us. We're just starting a Cleveland history class, so I think just a virtual tour like she showed, and I know I've done a number of lesson plans with Facing History, and they do awesome stuff. So having that available, vocabulary and telling the story, any primary or secondary sources that would go with that. And I love the idea that they, of course, Facing History, they put it back on the kids, where they have to make a decision for themselves based on the evidence. So, and then also they turned it into, well, what can be done today, moving forward, maybe some ideas for activities where, how could we improve the community? What are the kids going through? My kids have been through some terrible things through this pandemic, like most people, but it's really affected them in a number of ways that, just kind of blows my mind. So just a few ideas.
I appreciate that, Russ. Also, you probably are aware that Facing History has this incredible unit on Reconstruction. So looking at this pre-Civil War and then connecting with some of the choices that were made with Reconstruction using those primary sources could also be connected pretty well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I did just want to say again, thanks to everybody. And I do have to jump off soon, but I'll look forward to seeing these notes. I did put my contact information there, so you can certainly reach out to Greg, but feel free to reach out to me as well about getting connected to this space.
Thank you.
Some other thoughts about what would make you more likely to get connected to the Cozad-Bates House and its resources? Russ, your suggestion about like primary and secondary sources, I think is important. We have a lot of sort of assets that we can put on digitally on the website so that kids can analyze, for instance, media bias from the Plain Dealer compared to the Cleveland News or the Cleveland Leader, that sort of thing. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a huge need, as we see in the news today.
I like the challenges that you talked about in the past, Greg, as well as today with having the kids make a choice between being a bystander or being an upstander. And I think those are some great connections that not only connect to that time period, but also connect to today. And I think that's a great way to get kids to not only see the past history, but to see the history now and their future.
Yeah, especially like, we, in a lot of the conversations, the 13th Amendment as an example, and the mass incarceration that exists in the United States, to us is like a really important and ripe conversation, right? Between those who want law and order and yes, it's reduced crime and blah, 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 and the incredible, like staggering numbers of those incarcerated and the overwhelming number of prisoners or prisoners of color. So yeah, the idea is to have those conversations and see themselves in the choices that people in the past had to find themselves making.
Yeah, I think that could be done in an interactive way too. I think that would be a great way to connect with the kids. Thanks.
Greg, can I go ahead and just add my 2 cents as well, and agree with what others have said is, both what you're doing is so exciting as it relates to this topic, and of course, incorporating much of what Facing History does, it just seems a natural fit as well. This, connecting the past to the present, looking at the choices and how one themselves made choices in the past, but how kids can make choices today. But what I'm also equally excited about is that it's being curtailed to our community, right? So it's not just looking at it on a not just, but on a national level or otherwise, but I would like to think that kids can see in that they're seeing Cleveland's role historically and the people who lived in Cleveland, and they can see then what hopefully, the issues that still exist in the Cleveland area today and those who are addressing it, and they can see themselves in that. So it sounds to me like you're doing all that, in terms of virtually. But that's one of the things for sure that makes me excited to have my students involved in this. Because certainly that's a goal of mine in my history teaching, is trying to bring the narratives and the stories, bring them home to the kids, and use Cleveland and the Cleveland area to show them that the things that were happening in the past and or are happening in the present, as you mentioned, related to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, like continuing to make those connections locally.
So Yvonne, I appreciate it. And I appreciate being here. But I think you're right. I think there is a natural fit. And we've just started the conversations with the Facing History team because we would love to get Facing History educators or educators who are regularly connected to Facing History to be connected to this space, because it seems like such a natural fit if individuals are teaching US history, et cetera. So I think that there really is a natural fit. I should also say this too, that I know Elise and I and others who are involved in the planning really want to activate that front yard eventually, where that front yard becomes a place where conversations around these issues are held on a, maybe not a regular basis, but at least that space is seen as a place for those conversations. I didn't tell you this, Elise, I don't think, but I had a great conversation with the principal of the Cleveland School of the Arts. And without prompting, he said, I was just telling him a little bit all the things that UCI does. And he said, we have a lot of kids who are very active, especially in the protests that happened last summer, very active in the Black Lives Matter movement, et cetera. And it would be really great to have conversations between the UCPD or others and our students, our teenage students. And I said, well, that's kind of what we're hoping to do, is maybe even have that front yard be a space where those conversations about building a more just community could take place. So we're also trying to activate that eventually, of course, when things open up, that front yard.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add, Yvonne, which I'm not sure we said as part of the initial exhibit of 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, our initial goal was to try to tie it directly to Cleveland. And there was a little bit of pushback that, at least to start, if we could get it down to Ohio. But for each of those issues, we tie it not just nationally, but specifically to Ohio. What are Ohio's inequities in terms of mass incarceration? What does illegal immigration look like in Ohio, and what do voting rights look like? What are some current topics being debated in Ohio? So I think that space just has kind of unlimited opportunities to be refined and connected here locally. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, the key is to keep this history relevant in our community's conversation about the themes and the choices that we make. So I wonder if there are other insights that you have about being more likely to connect with Cozad-Bates and its resources. All right, that's my teacher wait time right there. Okay, so we just, that's right. 1 second, 2 seconds. Anyway, so I actually wanted to make an appeal as well on behalf. So those of you who know, like Aaron and I know that Aaron and I are both at UCI. We were involved in the Circle Walk, the development of the Circle Walk curriculum, as some of you were actually in the focus group conversation that helped us to develop it before we came to UCI. But as you probably heard me say, that the curriculum currently is focused on middle school and high school. And I'm going to throw out into the Teaching Cleveland world that we'd love to engage individuals to help us develop curriculum for younger kids, because eventually, of course, we want to have this to be a place where even pre-K kids all the way up through high school can engage thoughtfully in the issues here that the Cozad-Bates House raises. So I'm going to throw this out in the Teaching Cleveland world as sort of a call for educators, where we would like to have your ideas, and of course we would pay you for your time, your energy, your insights, but we really like to develop an elementary portion of the curriculum so that it complements nicely the middle and high school curriculum. So plant that in the back of your brain if you're interested, or if you're going back to your colleagues and you're like, hey, we went to this thing last night, just wanted you to know. So we'll follow up with this, but in an email, but I wanted you to know about that. Erin, did I miss anything? No? Okay.
I don't think so. I did put this in the chat earlier, but that if you're interested in that Circle Walk curriculum, please let us know, because we can certainly share that with you.
3 units as Elise described earlier, so I'm happy to do that. And then the last comment or announcement I'd say is just look for information about our February virtual Teaching Cleveland Virtual Learning Lab. And it will feature Randy McShepard of Policy Bridge and the Rid-All Green Partnership, who's going to talk about the Policy Bridge report about Black leadership in Cleveland. So he will be with us on February 17th. So we will send that out. We're actually going to be sending out a February newsletter highlighting some of our educators and our resources. So just wanted to have you hear that on February 17th is our next virtual learning lab. And actually, I'll just tell you our March virtual learning lab features Justin Bibb, who just announced that he's running for mayor. So Justin Bibb will be here to answer questions about his vision if he were to be able to become mayor of Cleveland. So that's on March 31st. So stay tuned for all that information. Just wanted to thank you for taking time out of, I'm sure, your very busy day. You've probably been Zooming the heck out of today anyway, and now you added more Zoom. So we appreciate the fact that you did that and took time to learn more. As always, you can reach out to us at Teaching Cleveland, just teachcleveland@gmail.com. And we feel very strongly about making sure you're connected to the resources in Cleveland to enrich your kids' experiences. So thank you again, Elise. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in February.
Thanks.
Thank you.